Good afternoon. Happy to see you all, and in fact, many more. I can see that quite a few other friends have joined. So as you know that this is the last day of this NCM workshop that has been going on since 2nd of January. And today, in the morning session, Professor Patil and Professor Jugal Verma have given their last lectures. And now we are in the closing part of this event where Professor Dipendra Prasad has kindly agreed to give a special lecture. And the topic of the lecture is, the title of the talk is Homological Duality in Representation Theory. And Professor Dipendra Prasad has said not to say too much about him. And I know he does not require any introduction. So he is a professor of IIT Bombay. And now I request Professor Prasad to start.
Okay, good. Thank you, Professor Sen Gupta. I am very happy to be requested to give this lecture. In some ways, I hope my lecture is very close to the topic that we are being discussed of late in this program. In fact, I have myself been attending some of the lectures, I think mostly by Professor Jugal Verma. I wish I could attend many more lectures, but for a variety of reasons, one has only so much time to attend. Good. So let us see how it goes. Once in a while, I will take pause and then I can ask for questions. Okay. All right. So, I am going to talk about partly things that you have been studying in this course and partly take it in a slightly different context. But mostly I will not emphasize the specific nature of the different problem that I want to deal with. But in any case, I want to begin by giving an introduction about what homological aspects are we talking about. So recall that if G is a finite group, then its representations over complex numbers are semi-simple, which means that every representation is a direct sum of irreducible representations. An equivalent way to make this statement is that if you have any subspace pi1 of a representation pi, then there exists a complementary space pi2 inside pi such that pi is a direct sum. This is what is called semi-simple. Every submodule has a complement. Equivalently, any exact sequence of group representations, pi1 goes to pi2, splits. So this is what is semi-simplicity of representations, and this is true for finite groups for complex over complex numbers. It is also true for compact groups and also true for certain algebraic groups. But I don't think I want to talk about too much of compact groups or algebraic groups in this talk. Okay, so this property of representations of finite groups finite groups G over C is not shared by infinite groups or representations of finite groups in characteristic P. So which means that there are exact sequences of this kind which cannot be split, or there is a submodule which is not a direct summand. Okay, so just to warm you up that there are many interesting representations which are not semi-simple. Here is an example. So you look at the group GLN FP, n by n matrices with coefficients in the finite field with P elements. And this group comes equipped with its natural representation on the vector space Fp to the power n, on which this is called the defining representation of the group G. And here I take P to be the prime 2. So it's a GLN of F2. So in this case, one has an exact sequence of G modules, exterior is square. So yeah, so I presume that in this program, certainly people know their exterior algebra very well, without any doubt. So there is the symmetric square, but in characteristic 2, there is this special feature that exterior square is contained in symmetric square. And there is a quotient which is isomorphic to V, the standard representation. So, you know, people may know that the dimension of symmetric square is n into n plus 1 by 2, and of exterior square is n into n minus 1 by 2, and the difference is n, which is the dimension of V. Only in characteristic 2, there is such a exact sequence of representations, but this is not a split exact sequence. So there are non-split exact sequences for finite groups which appear. So as a general remark, any non-split exact sequence such as the above gives rise to an element of x1 v comma lambda 2 v. So it's always written the quotient module appears first and the submodule appears in the second variable. So a non-split exact sequence gives rise to an element in x1 which is non-zero. Okay. In general, an exact sequence of larger length, let's say 0 goes to F, goes to F1, goes to F2, goes to Fn, goes to E, goes to 0, in any abelian category A, gives rise to an element in Xn in the abelian category A. So Xn, it is written as E comma F. E is this object and F is that object. So, you know, this lecture, I certainly will assume that the audience is familiar and comfortable with what is called an abelian category. But one example of an abelian category is the category of representations of any group. So category of representation of any group is an abelian category. And another good example of an abelian category to keep in mind is category of representations of a ring, which may or may not be commutative. So representations of a group is same thing as representations of the corresponding group ring. And therefore, the case of the groups is a special case of general rings. Okay, so a general exact sequence of length. So in any case, this gives rise to an element in XNEF. Okay. Although it is not so easy to determine for n larger than 1 if this element is 0 or not. So, you know, for n equals 1, I said that that element in X1 is always non-zero. This statement is, yeah, so is non-zero is equivalent to saying that that sequence is non-split. But if you have a larger exact sequence, then it is not so easy to understand what it means that the element in X10 is 0 or non-zero. It is roughly related to non-splitness of the above sequence, but you know, first of all, I am not defining what it means to say non-splitness of a large sequence. You know, you can split it, you can write it as short exact sequences, and they should be non-split. So that is a necessary condition. but that is not sufficient. Okay, my own interests are in representations of certain infinite groups called PRD groups, for which again the category of representations is abelian, and which is a non-semi-simple category, which means that there are submodules which are not direct summands, or they are exact sequences which are non-split. It has, like all abelian categories considered in this lecture, a good supply of projective and injective objects which allow one to define xn e comma f using projective resolution of E or injective resolution of F. So, you know, there is a definition of xn using extensions of the kind that I just talked about. But I think that definition is not so practical. And more practical definition, more simple definition is using projective or injective resolution, which give rise to immediate consequences. Okay. Okay, so a first example of a PRD group is a multiplicative group of QP, which is QP star, non-zero elements of the field QP, which as a topological group is GP star cross G. So, you know, I'm sure Dilip Patil has been giving lectures on completions and Cohen structure theorem and all that. So QP and GP are the first complete rings that one encounters. Indeed. So QP star is GP star cross G, and this G is related to the uniformizing parameter in QP star, which can be taken to be the element P. So this G is P to the power powers of P, both positive powers, negative powers, and P to the power 0. So for our purposes, GP star behaves like a finite group. This is what is a compact group. And for our purposes, this behaves like a finite group. Since we will be looking at complex representations of PRD groups, finite groups have no real interest in homological matters. And therefore, the representations of QP star are really representations of integers, which matter to us. So the integers is a quotient of QP star, and therefore any representations of integers is a representation of QP star, because maybe I should also try to use this. So you have a group G, and suppose G has a quotient Q, then representations of Q embed into representations of G. And thus representations of G are representations of QP star. And okay. So as you know very well, representations of integer. So, you know, the group ring of integers is CTT inverse. And I already said that representations of a group or of its group ring are the same. And therefore, representations of Z are nothing but representations of CTT inverse. So, representations of Z are in bijective correspondence with modules over CTT inverse, or you know, representations of Z to the power n similarly are in bijective correspondence with modules over C T1 Tn T1 inverse Tn inverse. Okay. So, of course, these are rings of interest in commutative algebra, and representation theory of these groups, which could be considered to be periodic groups, are nothing but modules over this ring. And modules over this ring have a nice homological algebra associated to it, and which is what we want to imitate to do, so to say, a homological algebra for periodic groups. Okay. So just to be a little more specific, for example, we have the so you know, on one of the earlier slides, I talked about a non-split exact sequence of groups. And now I talk about non-split exact sequences of rings that you are familiar with in this course. So for example, this AN is CT1 TN, TI inverse added. And you look at any non-zero element and you have this exact sequence. And once again, this is a non-split exact sequence, which gives rise to an element of x1 an by f comma an over, so this x1 is over an. More generally, there is the Koszul complex that is well studied in this program. You have a to the power r dot dot dot, and it ends with a, and then it goes modulo f1 fr, where f1 fr is any a regular sequence. And what I want to say is that this is an exact sequence, and there are r terms in between, and it gives rise to an element of x r a mod f1 fr comma a. And this is certainly a non-zero element, and one knows by the general Koszul complex arguments that this x star in fact is isomorphic to a mod f1 fr, and so to say this particular element is a generator of that. Okay. So my interest is in questions of the following kind. Somehow the obvious general question to understand is to understand x r pi 1 pi 2 for any two irreducible representations pi 1 and pi 2 of the group GQP. So you know, this is a rather general question. It presumes that you already know what are the representations of a periodic group, and then for each representation you want to understand which x i's are zero and which are non-zero, and if they are non-zero, what structure they have. So in some sense that will be a complete knowledge that one may desire to have. It is not clear whether that's a simple question to be able to do it or complex. So this is part A of the my interest. The other question which also interests me is that suppose x star is non-zero. You have done it by maybe some homological method that you know that some x star is non-zero. Then the question is whether you can construct a concrete extension of the kind that we are talking about. 0 goes to pi 2, goes to f1, goes to f2, goes to fr, goes to pi 1, goes to 0, which gives rise to this element in x star. So this question also seems to me of great value, that sometimes you have abstract theorems which say that X stars are non-zero. And what I would like to do is to construct exact sequences which construct the elements in X star. Okay. Okay, so at this point, by analogy with commutative algebra, let us see what one is trying to do. So given a commutative algebra A, and of course, in algebra or in algebraic geometry, you can either begin with a very simple ring and complicated modules, or complicated rings and simple modules. So there is this viewpoint. I do not know how popular this viewpoint is, or whether this viewpoint has been used in this program. But there is the viewpoint that your ring may be very simple, but module may be complicated, or ring may be complicated, but module is simple. So here I am looking at a commutative algebra A, such as polynomial ring Cx1 xn, or even much easier one such as power series ring. So yeah, indeed. So I hope the audience here knows that power series rings are indeed so much easier than polynomials. And of course, polynomials are so much easier than what we have been discussing on Cohen-Macaulay rings. So I think the first question is, if I were to answer this question with any satisfaction, question A is to understand X star pi 1, pi 2. So if I want to understand X star, then I should first know what are pi 1 and pi 2. And for a ring, I think the first question begs the question if we can classify finitely generated modules over such a ring A. And then given the answer in way A, which means that if we know some way to understand all finitely generated modules over polynomial ring, then the next question is, are we then in a position to calculate X I Mn? Not by just saying that how it is calculated, but to come up with more efficient recipes or theorems. Okay, so this is a remark for my more senior friends in the audience. As far as I know, there is no simple classification of finitely generated modules, even over two-dimensional regular local rings such as C power series x1, x2. I could be challenged, but maybe, in fact, I am happy to hear people out. So of course, I should begin by saying that zero-dimensional object of my interest is a field for which no problems about vector spaces. Then the next object is Cx, which is a PID, and structure theorem for modules over a PID is one of the important topics in graduate course. But nobody ever studies modules over C power series x1, x2. Yeah, so I also say this with some confidence because I know that there is a subject in number theory called Iwasawa theory, which tries to understand modules over C power series x1, x2. And somehow what they say is that they will classify modules up to modules of finite length. So there is a certain pseudo isomorphism that they introduce, and they define M to be pseudo isomorphic to N if, so let me just say, so in Iwasawa theory, so okay, so Iwasawa theory does a slightly different ring, but okay, maybe for starters it is similar to C power series XY. Perhaps C power series XY is much simpler than this ring, but I presume that they are similar. And here one defines a pseudo isomorphism M, pseudo isomorphic to N, if there exists a morphism with finite kernel and finite co-kernel. And finite co-kernel. And with this equivalence, they can classify modules. So there is a structure theorem for modules. So over GP power series X up to the above ambiguity. Okay, so yeah, so then I have randomly asked this question: how about finite length modules? Can they be classified over C power series X1, X2 in any meaningful way? And in the beginning of the class, I saw my friend Sajid there. Maybe it belongs to quivers. The subject of quivers, I am not sure which subject it may belong. But okay, all right. So that's okay. So given that we have not much hope of classifying modules over a good ring in algebra, and not to speak about their X modules and other things, it comes indeed as a bit of a surprise that we can attempt to understand the corresponding question for PRD groups. And perhaps, yeah, so maybe just to say that, much of mathematics is also about framing questions well, which can be answered. So here, I talked about irreducible representations, pi1 and pi2, and not general representations. So somehow there was a small caveat that I had already put there, that I don't want to look at all representations, but only irreducible representations. Okay. Okay, so this was the introduction, and it's half an hour, and I'm happy to take a pause and take any questions. Please unmute yourself and please feel free to ask. Yeah, so in some ways, I can only see these notes of mine, and I can see a few people on my sidebar, but very few. But I am in some ways, my lecture is not a part of a course, so it is more to inspire you to think differently, maybe. And in some ways, I do want to partly challenge you into slightly different ways of looking at things. Okay, good. So the next topic that I want to come to, in some sense, this is the main thing I want to do for PRD groups. I mean, okay, when I say I want to do, meaning I want to understand in some ways a topic which is already in existence. It's not that it's a new topic. Okay, so people, of course, there has been all these lectures about Goldstein and Cohen-Macaulay rings, and those lectures are indeed for duality theories, and therefore most of you are already quite knowledgeable on this topic. But this lecture is more a review for myself than for you, and I hope therefore you will not mind that I will repeat some of what you already know. Okay, so duality that is being talked about is to generalize the contragradient D from vector space to vector spaces on finite dimensional vector spaces over K. The main feature of D are that D is an exact contravariant functor, and D square is isomorphic to identity. So in fact, in this remark, I say that it is easy to see that once D square is isomorphic to identity, so you know D is a functor and D square is another functor. Now it is a covariant functor, and if the D square is naturally isomorphic in the sense of functors to the identity functor, then D is forced to be an exact contravariant functor. No, exact functor, not contravariant. Contravariant is already supposed to be given for D. Okay. So this is what one wants to achieve. So thus we want to construct a contravariant functor, say from the category of finitely generated A modules to itself, such that D square is identity. So somehow I must say that I have never thought about this problem so carefully, and this is what has been discussed in these lectures of Professor Jugal Verma. Okay. So I think there is one case in which the answer is very simple-minded, and that is when M is of finite length over A, which is same thing as M is finite dimensional over K. Then one way to construct an exact contravariant functor is just look at Hom M comma K, but now treat it as given with the A module structure. So if M is an A module, Hom M comma K comes naturally as a module. So if M is of finite length, finite dimensional over K, then this is again finite length over A, and D square is isomorphic to identity. However, if M is not finite length, then Hom MK is uncountable dimensional, so it's not a reasonable object over A. So I suppose people realize this. Supposing we are looking at the ring CX, and we want to construct a contragradient, some duality functor on modules over CX. So I'm just saying that if you looked at Hom CX, C, and C, so this is a CX module, has a CX module structure. But this is not a module that we like to even think about, because this has uncountable dimensional. So not finitely generated. And we are hoping to construct a duality functor which is as close to finite dimensional vector spaces going to finite dimensional vector spaces, finitely generated modules going to finitely generated modules. So, you know, there could be something else that we could do, which is look at Hom M comma A. So if M is a free object, then of course this is quite nice. But if M is not a free object, you know, if it has some torsion, then that torsion will get killed in this process. And somehow it would not be an exact functor of any kind. So somehow it requires more thoughts. Okay, so here is a theorem that I have borrowed from this book of Eisenbud, commutative algebra towards algebraic geometry or something. This is proposition slash definition 21.1. And the theorem says that for an Artinian local ring A comma M, there is one and only one dualizing functor D. So by a dualizing functor, one just means D square. So yeah, so dualizing functor is a contravariant functor. So dualizing functor. So D square is identity and contravariant. So this theorem of Eisenbud, in fact, is rather beautiful, and it is a prototype of what we would like to have. And it says that there is one and only one dualizing functor. And the proof is also quite illuminating. So I quickly give you a proof. Because D is, because D square is identity, it follows that this mapping, so it's a contravariant functor, so from Hom Mn to Hom Dn comma Dm is an isomorphism. You know, it cannot have a kernel because otherwise you can do again D square and then it has to be identity. And so it cannot have a kernel, and it must also be surjective for similar reasons. And therefore, D of a module M is Hom, by definition for any module, Hom A dm is dm. And by this isomorphism, there is the isomorphism between Hom A dm and M dA. And since M goes to dm is an exact functor, which we have already observed, it follows that dA is an injective module, because that's the definition of an injective module, that this functor M goes to Hom M comma something is exact. So this proves that dA is an injective module. We also note that Hom K comma dA is again by that property Hom A comma dk, but Hom K comma Hom A comma dk, which is isomorphic to dk, which is isomorphic to k, because d square is identity, and therefore dk has to be length 1 module, and the only length 1 module over a local ring is k. So dk is isomorphic to k, and therefore Hom A dk, which is dk by because it's a to something, and therefore k sits inside dA, because this is non-zero, so k sits inside dA, and dA is the injective hull of k. This proves that dA is unique because it is the injective hull of k, and injective hulls are supposed to be unique. and hence dm, which is Hom mda, is unique up to isomorphisms. So in fact, this theorem is one about existence and uniqueness. It says that any dualizing functor is given by is given by d of m is equal to Hom m comma dA, which is the injective hull of K. So you take the injective hull of K, call it dA, and you look at this functor, and then that functor is the dualizing functor. On the other hand, we also saw that m goes to Hom mk is a dualizing functor, and putting these two together, one sees that Hom ak is the injective hull of K. Because, you know, in some ways, the dualizing functor takes the value on A, Hom A comma K, which is Ek. Okay, so good. So, you know, one can directly give a proof that Hom Ak is the injective hull of K. That's quite simple-minded, but I won't go into that. Okay. So now I just want to bring to you this theorem, which is maybe the content of last 2 days lectures of Jugal. So let A be a Cohen-Macaulay local ring of dimension D. Then there is a maximal Cohen-Macaulay module omega A of finite injective dimension such that m goes to x of d minus t m comma omega A, you call it dm, is a dualizing functor on the category of Cohen-Macaulay modules of dimension t. So I think Jugal was careful about saying that there is not always a dualizing module omega A. But, you know, since I am assuming my Cohen-Macaulay modules to contain a field, I do not think that's an issue. I don't believe so, but it is possible that I am missing out on something. In any case, this is a theorem that on the category of Cohen-Macaulay modules of a given dimension, m goes to x of d minus t is a dualizing functor in the sense that dm is also Cohen-Macaulay module of dimension same as m, and d of m is isomorphic to m. And there is the further property that xi of m comma omega A is 0 for all I not equal to d minus t. So this is a good enough duality theory for Cohen-Macaulay rings. Although for my taste, it doesn't look as general as I would have liked it to be. Somehow I would have liked it to be true for all modules, all finitely generated modules, whereas it is not on the category of finitely generated modules, but on the category of Cohen-Macaulay modules of a given dimension. And so I will come back to that point of view later. So a particular case of this is that on maximal Cohen-Macaulay modules, m goes to have Hom m omega A is a duality functor, because in that case d equals t and the x of 0 is Hom. So m goes to Hom m omega A is a dualizing functor, and this omega A is supposed to be just A if A is Gorenstein, and such modules then are called reflexive modules. So I will just add that word here. Dualizing module So reflexive module. So there is always to any module M, there is a natural mapping from M to HOM M, HOM MA. Am I doing something wrong? V goes to V star star, V star. So this was HOM.
HOM MA, comma A.
No, I got it. So double dual, reflexive modules, and so maximal Cohen-Macaulay modules are reflexive modules. Okay. But as I said, to my taste, this doesn't look very general, and I hope somebody at some point will point out what may be more general. Okay. So, okay, so look at this theorem, and okay, so maybe this theorem that I'm going to state doesn't quite look like that, but okay. So here is the theorem about PRD groups. So G is GQP and pi is a smooth representation of G of finite length. Then there is a duality functor, pi goes to d pi. And this duality functor is not something so simple, just as the duality theory here is not so simple. M, the dual of M is not HOM M A or M omega A, but slightly more complicated. And but I think the other thing I would like to maybe popularize is that from a homological point of view, thinking about reflexive module or looking at HOM MA is not adequate or not good. And not good. And, you know, in some sense, soon we will talk about these more decorated objects, and we should be looking at our HOM instead of HOM. And this is a language that I will briefly recall, but this language is related to X I of M comma A. Okay, so there is this duality functor, and this duality functor has some property which is similar to what is called Grothendieck-Serre duality in some generality, or Serre duality in usual complex algebraic geometry, which is a statement of the following kind: x I of pi 1 pi 2 cross x of d pi 1 minus I pi 2 d pi 1 to x d pi 1 here, pi 1 d pi 1, and there is a pairing to C, and this is a perfect pairing. So the essence is that x I pi 1 pi 2 is dual of x d pi minus I pi 2 d pi 1. So this is what my own interests are, to understand these pairings. And
what is d pi? What is d pi?
D pi is that is what I said. It's the duality functor, dualizing functor. You know, it is something which I have left vague, maybe for rings it is the dualizing complex, and for Cohen-Macaulay ring it's a dualizing module. And this functor that one gets, M goes to dm. So this is the functor that is of interest to us. M goes to dm.
Okay.
Okay. So okay, so there is this general notion of what is called a Serre functor on a K linear category, and this is an equivalence of categories from C to C together with natural isomorphism between Hom AB star and Hom B SA, where S is that Serre functor, and somehow the name Serre functor and the reason to think about this is because what is called this Grothendieck-Serre duality, that for smooth projective variety and omega x is the canonical sheaf, then for any two coherent modules f and g, xi fg, the dual vector space is x d minus I g f tensor omega x. So this is a general theorem in algebraic geometry which generalizes what is much more special case, which is what is called Serre duality, which says that xi xg is isomorphic to x d minus I x g hat tensored with the canonical sheaf. So this theorem is a special case of this particular theorem, and somehow this is what is used to define a Serre functor, which takes a coherent sheaf f to f tensor omega. Okay, so yeah, so at this moment I want to slightly delve into what may or may not be such a new territory for you. It has been somewhat of a new territory for me also, although I have been not so far away from it either. So people of course know abelian categories and what are called derived functors, but then there is something called derived categories. And somehow I want to show you how these derived categories can be very useful to formulate or reformulate the theorems that we are talking about. So I will give you a small introduction to derived categories. I hope not very inaccurate. It is always a struggle for me to understand these things. But anyway, I am happy to take any questions. Okay, so fine. All right, so the derived category of an abelian category. So given an abelian category A, one constructs CA, the category of chain complexes in A. So this is the usual simple-minded thing. You would look at chain complexes. And then there is this KA, which are chain complexes modulo homotopy equivalence. So you look at morphisms of chain complexes, but you declare two morphisms to be the same if they are homotopic to each other. So this is KA, and the derived category of A, the objects are just chain complexes, but the morphisms are homotopy classes of maps up to quasi-isomorphism. So, it is said that derived category is obtained from this homotopy category Ka by by localization, as we are used to in commutative algebra, that you try to invert certain things. Localization. So what it means is that you know, these C1, C2 are chain complexes in the abelian category A, and a morphism from C1 to C2 may not look like a morphism from C1 to C2, but in fact it is a morphism from C to C2, and C to C1 there is only a quasi-isomorphism. So quasi-isomorphism is a morphism between chain complexes which induces isomorphism on their cohomologies. So, you know, this one doesn't look like a morphism from C1 to C2 because the arrows are a little skewed, but this quasi-isomorphism you are supposed to invert, and then it becomes a mapping from C1 to C to C2, so which is fine. So similarly, this one doesn't look like a morphism from C1 to C2, but it is, because you can invert the mapping from C2 to C to become C to C2. So, you know, there is this condition called the OR condition, which comes up in group rings. Basically, one wants to write any element B inverse A as also CD inverse. So, you know, when you have a product of this kind, then you want to reorganize it using these rules, and that can be done. That can be done, and I think there are many subtleties, but in any case, roughly speaking, the derived category of an abelian category is the category of chain complexes, but morphisms are not what may look obvious, but slightly more non-obvious morphisms. Okay, so okay, so now I am recalling what is the difference between derived categories and what one is used to in derived functors. So suppose that f from A to B is a left exact functor. Then one defines the derived functors. So these are called right derived functors of a left exact functor, which is RIF on an object A is ith cohomology of f of I dot. So where I dot is a chain complex together with a quasi isomorphism between A and I dot, and I seem to have forgotten to write that I dot is a chain complex consisting of injective objects. So these are the derived functors, and special cases of these derived functors are these Ext and Hom and so on that you are very familiar with. I guess you also know derived functors, but somehow this language of derived functors is a bit inadequate to talk about, especially if there are two functors. Then you know, injective may not go to injective, and it creates some problem. So derived functors are have some limitations which derived categories overcome. So I think the important observation is that you know, to construct derived functors, you look at cohomology of a certain complex, but the complex itself is available to you, which is well defined up to homotopy, because you know, under any functor, homotopy goes to homotopy, and I dot is well defined up to homotopy, and therefore f of I dot is well defined up to homotopy. And the point of view of derived category is to work with complexes instead of cohomology of complexes. So you know, the derived functors will be cohomology of f of I dot, but instead of looking at hi, just look at fi dot, and you will construct a complex in B and in the derived category of B, and you just deal with that object. Okay. So here are some basic examples. So, you know, you talk about Tor I m comma n as ith homology of P dot tensor n. So you take a projective resolution of M and you look at P dot tensor n, that's a chain complex, and its cohomology is Tor. So instead of doing this in the derived language, derived category language, you will just look at M tensor n over L, which is P dot tensor n. So, you know, you are just forgetting to take homology or cohomology. You just look at the object which you get by projective or injective resolution, and all that one cares at the moment is that it's a well-defined object in the derived category. So there are these notations M tensor n over L. So these are called left derived tensor products. And similarly, there is R harm M dot n, which is harm of P dot comma n dot. So, you know, the usual X business would be to look at this complex and then you look at some cohomology of this complex. Instead of looking at the cohomology, you just look at the complex and you treat this as an object in the derived category. So, you know, the derived category also one needs some care. There are these bounded derived complexes. Then these are complexes which are 0 in the negative degree or 0 beyond some negative degree. And these are 0 beyond some positive degree. These are derived category, derived category of finite length objects in A and so on. So it comes with all that variants. Okay, so then here is an important definition for my lecture. So a complex is called a perfect complex if it is quasi-isomorphic to a complex consisting of projective modules such that Pi is 0 for all but finitely many I and rank of Pi is finite. So that means what? Okay, so here I just put it as a question for it's in fact a question for me to be clarified on. Suppose A is a finite A module M. So a finite A module is perfect if M has finite projective dimension. And my question is, do we know what are modules of finite projective dimension over a Cohen-Macaulay ring? I think more specifically in the context of that theorem, I'm asking whether Cohen-Macaulay Cohen-Macaulay modules are finite projective dimension. Maybe somebody knows that answer already. So let me rewrite that question. So A is a Cohen-Macaulay ring. M Cohen-Macaulay module is M finite projective dimension. In any case, you know, as I said, for me, Cohen-Macaulay rings are, of course, the rings to worry about. But, you know, I could look at a regular local ring and I have no problem. And then, of course, M has finite projective dimension. So a special case seems to be okay. Okay, so now in any case, I think the question which I am asking here is to classify over Cohen-Macaulay ring finite projective. So question there is classify modules of finite projective dimension. You know, so much premium is paid on A being a finite injective dimension, but I don't know why this is not such a well-known question. Okay, fine. Okay, so then I have these what are called change of rings adjunction. So in some ways, the adjunctions have been playing a lot of role in the course that we are taking of Jugal, and they will play a rather important role in what is to come. So I will. I think K being a field plays no role, but K will be a field for when I apply. So these are adjunction formulas. Yeah, and then there is a derived version of that. So I will make no comments about them and go on. So yeah, so I think in what follows, A has finite homological dimension. And all modules are perfect complexes. So I said that a module being a perfect complex means that it has a finite projective resolution of finitely generated projective modules. And I think looking at these proofs, only you will believe how simple this language is. And I hope I am not cheating. Okay, so you know, this is the kind of object we were looking at on this slide. This slide. M goes to harm M comma omega A or harm M comma A. I will not worry too much about the difference between A and omega A. And okay, so I'm looking at this functor. So this is a functor on the derived category of A. So this dA is the derived category of modules over A. It contains, of course, modules over A, because any module is also a complex of modules. And as I said, R harm MA is replace M by a projective resolution. And since M is a perfect module, it has a finite projective resolution, finitely generated finite projective resolution. Look at harm there. And I am saying that D of M is isomorphic to M. So this was one of the theorems I was just talking about. And let us see how this works here. Okay, so you know, this is maybe more elementary devisage than what we are used to. So if M is a projective module P, then you know projective module is a direct summand of a free module. And since everything is linear, you are reduced to proving it for P equals A, and R harm AA is A, and therefore D of A is A, and therefore DDA is A. So this gets proven for projective modules, and in general, any module is quasi-isomorphic to a projective module, which just means that you resolve a module by a projective modules. Then by definition of R harm MA is harm of P dot A. That's the definition. And now you see that these P dots are finitely generated projective modules, and therefore P dot to harm P dot A, this is an isomorphism. And that gives you the isomorphism of DDM is isomorphic to M. So I get the feeling that this theorem I was asking you about, whether this has a generalization, seems to be there for any module which has finite projective resolution. So these modules have only one X groups, but my modules may have many X groups, and still they kind of come together, and D of M is equal to M. So yeah, in some ways, it's hard to believe that this is even a mathematical proof, but it looks okay to me for them. All right, so that means that this is a dualizing functor. M goes to dm, which is R harm ma. Of course, R harm ma is not a module. So that, of course, there are a lot of hidden subtleties maybe. So this DM is not a module. It's the object in the derived category of modules. And then you do once more, and then we are saying that in the derived category, these are isomorphic. And then in particular, you can say that they have the same homology or cohomology, and its cohomology is concentrated in 1 degree, and therefore so is the left-hand sides. Okay, so now similarly, let's look at this proposition. Once again, under the hypothesis that this M is a finite, is a perfect complex, then the statement is R harm MA, this derived tensor with N is R harm MN. And if M is projective module, then R harm PA is by definition just harm PA, and projective being a direct summand of free, it's enough to prove it for free, and then it is clear, and then it is clear. So this is there, and this is the said functor property that I was talking about, that R harm Mn, the dual vector space, is isomorphic to R harm N comma Dm star. And the proof is you just unwind the definition. R harm A, so these are over A, N comma Dm, but Dm is M comma A star, and this is nothing but R harm K over a field, R harm MA comma K, and by one of those adjunction lemmas, this is R harm K, N tensor R harm MA K, and this was the previous one, and that identifies it to R harm MA. So this one R harm Mn is, sorry, this object is R harm Mn by the previous lemma. R harm Mn is R harm Ma tensored with N. Okay, so proposition 3 applied to finite dimensional algebras of finite homological dimension goes under the name of Nakayama duality, and this functor R harm Ma is called the Nakayama dual. I should add that, all this has been done with a view to non-commutative rings, and the formulation, etc., works well for non-commutative rings. So there is a lot of rich homological algebra for finite dimensional algebras of finite homological dimension. I already said QWERTZ, etc. People in commutative algebra realize that finite dimensional commutative algebras of finite homological dimension are nothing but K. And therefore, somehow the strength of these theorems will be in the context of finite dimensional algebras only for non-commutative contexts. So, okay, I will maybe end soon. Let me see if there are any questions, or maybe anyway we are going to end soon, so maybe I can take them at that then. What I want to do quickly is to present to you some generalities about rings and modules, which somehow look amazingly made for each other in the non-commutative context. When I used to read Lang's algebra and there were these balanced modules and so on, I used to get quite terrified. But only when you start to kind of get confused, then you realize that the subject has been really done with a lot of care. So I would not take much of your time, but just to say that, so, we were talking about Hom M, N, and somehow the situation where one talks about Hom M, N is in the context where M is a right R module, left S module, N is a right R module, left T module, and F is R linear. So F of MR is FMR. And then this H becomes T comma S module. T comma S. So T comes from here. So somehow what one has to remember is that N is a covariant functor, and N is sitting in the covariant, and M is sitting in the contravariant place. And the co continues in the same place, but contra comes in the other place. So H becomes a TS module by TFS on M is TF on SM. So you see somehow it's really made for each other. I mean, you didn't have to change places. You have to just put brackets and do nothing more. And yeah, so with so this is the usual context of Hom spaces. When one is dealing with non-commutative rings, you have to keep in mind the various rings which may be operating, and they must sit in some particular place in a nice way. And similarly for tensor products, so you have modules U, which is left Q, right R module, and a module V, which is left R, right S module. And then you talk about U tensor V over R, which is a left Q and right S module. And then we have this adjunction formula, and in some sense that's the important formula. And then this idea we have used many times in commutative algebra. Given a morphism of rings R to S, any S module may be treated as an R module via this, but they are adjoint functors. from modules over, so this goes from modules over S to modules over R. And this is written as U goes to F of U. And then there are various adjoint functors. One of them is, so adjoints, they go from R modules to S modules. V tensor S over R. And here S is to be treated as left R, right S module. And therefore this VF is an S module, right S module. And we have this adjunction. And then there is another one, V upper F, which is HOM SA over R. And in that HOM notation, this S is supposed to be right R module, left S module. And therefore, this becomes an S module. And then there is its own adjunction formula. So, people who study group representations, especially in finite group theory, they are used to induction, which is this functor. Whereas people who do PRD groups, etc., I think they use more of co-induction, which is this functor. Then there is these generalities that if just because of the adjunction formulas of this kind, that if M is R projective, then MF is S projective, whereas if M is R injective, then MS is S injective. So it's a way to construct from a ring R an injective modules for the bigger ring S. And these allow you to construct enough injective modules for any ring R, and that allows you to start doing homological algebra. In any case, these adjunctions are what comes up, which I did not do too carefully in these these adjunctions that we were talking about, trying to understand X spaces between Mn and X spaces between N and dual object. So in the sense of Sayre functor, which I defined here, Sayre functor here. So this is HOM in the sense of the categories, and X is in the derived category or something. Yeah, all right. So that is all that I had to say. Thank you for your attention.